Thank you, Elsa. Thank you very much to all of you who organize these events. Thanks for the invitation, and I think it's really great to have students organizing these kind of seminars, well, series of seminars in this case, on a topic as important as energy justice, and especially to indeed take a different view at the energy system and its transformation, which is not only based on technological developments, but also what we are doing with these technologies. No, technology is not neutral, so it's always important to keep these kind of aspects in mind and to avoid having only a, I would say, technicist take on it. Okay, so I'm going to share my presentation, which you should now see.
Looks great.
Okay, cool. Just moving a few windows around, reorganizing my setup. Okay. So indeed, I'm Romain Mouget, and I'm going to talk a bit about the issue of integrating non-legal radical theories into, in this case, EU law and its member states. But of course, this is a reflection that can also be adapted to other legal frameworks in other geographies. No, but I'm talking about what I would say I know, or at least to some extent. So I'm focusing on EU law and member states. But once more, then we can also expand on other aspects or take lessons from this. And these different theories I will be diving into are energy justice, energy sufficiency, and degrowth. I will go into these different theories. Of course, energy justice, I think you already know it, but more for sufficiency and degrowth to develop it a bit more. So, about the presentation itself, here's the outline. So first, a few words about well, who I am, what did I do? Although Elsa actually said quite some parts of it, but maybe some more details into this. Then the situation in which we are in terms of I would say, inhabitants of planet Earth, no, and the need for radical change. Then a few words about what is the law, especially here in this case, as I'm addressing non-lawyers. How can we simply consider the law and where does it send us to? Before entering really into, I would say, the hardcore parts, no, the more content loaded, somehow parts on the challenge, of course, of integrating these non-legal radical theories into EU law in these member states with these three different theories. And before a few words of conclusion, I was told I had some, 5-10 minutes for introducing myself and some 45 minutes for the presentation and then some 30 minutes for questions. I will try to keep the time. Maybe I finish it a bit before. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, who am I? What did I do? So, well, I would say I started my studies after my after when I left high school in 2006. Then I did my bachelor, then my master's degree, and actually after my master's degree in 2011, I started to work as a wind farm developer in an energy company because I would say, okay, I had enough studies. I would like to have a real job. Then I did it for 3 years. It was great, but then I was like, actually, research is not that bad. And I went back to university to do my PhD in public law about the energy transition law in France when it was time of the adoption of a really cornerstone act for the energy transition in France in 2015. So that was at this moment. But I actually mostly spent these years in South Africa when I was with my wife had a position there, a postdoc, she's an environmental lawyer. And then we moved to the Netherlands, where I was postdoc and assistant professor in energy law at the in Groningen, University of Groningen, is north of the Netherlands, where there is a large energy law center. And 1.5 years ago, I moved then to Spain, to Cáceres, to become the head of the legal research unit at the Iberian Center for Research in Energy Storage, where we do a lot of interdisciplinary research on these families of technologies. So indeed, what am I working on? Well, as was introduced, on the legal regime for technologies and actors for the energy transition, renewables, hydrogen, smart grids. So to say smart grids, it's a bit broader in this case, such as storage, microgrids, EVs, electricity markets, and so on. Actors, energy communities, water, energy, food communities, which is a new concept that we were bringing forward a few years ago, but also the retirement of incumbent power plants, also with this, I have this layer of theories of justice, energy transition, and the law, such as energy transition, also just transition. I will dive a bit into this tonight. Well, tonight on my side of the earth, of course. Also into interdisciplinary research. For example, I've done some work with some colleagues on law and techno-economic modeling, which proves quite interesting. Of course, now on degrowth, so I will enter also more into that, but especially with the framework of this new project I've just started now 1 month ago. And in terms of geographical coverage, mostly Europe, Latin America, and also, especially during my postdoc, quite a strong focus on islands themselves. The CIA, so the center where I'm working, what is it? So it's this center which is located really in the, I would say, well, southwesternmost corner of Europe, so close to Portugal already, and we are close to 100 researchers there for a center that was started basically 2 years ago. And we have different departments where we study electrical storage, so mostly batteries, hydrogen and power-to-X, and thermal storage. And this is where most of the people, I would say, are. But in addition, on the second line, you can see a number of horizontal units, among which life cycle analysis, circular economy, techno-economic analysis, energy system analysis, and regulation. And each of these units is a small group of people that where we are working with all the different other partners in the center, the other colleagues. And I've said, I'm in charge of the regulation parts and working with all these different units. Yes. Okay. So starting with the presentation itself. So a few words about the situation in which we are. Okay, I'm advertising you. This is the depressing part with this slide and the coming ones. I'm sure that you will not learn maybe that much, but it comes as what to refresh a bit our minds on this. So 6 and close to actually 7 of the planetary boundaries have been crossed out of 9. Of course, within this, we have climate change. We know this, but we also have biodiversity extinction, land system change, freshwater change, geochemical flows such as phosphorus and nitrogen, but also novel entities, especially plastics, and the one that is close to be crossed is ocean acidification. If we just focus on climate change, so last year was the first year where we surpassed actually 1.5 degrees for the year. So this is, of course, a pretty bad news. Also, recently, a couple of weeks ago, a renowned climate scientist, James Hansen, declared that the 2 degrees target was basically dead because the global heating on the climate change just continues because emissions continue to rise and definitely way too fast. Here is also an update from November 2024 by the Climate Action Tracker. So currently, with the existing policies and actions, and this is before Trump took office, we are heading towards plus 2.7 degrees by the end of the century, but it could actually be less or more. There is this kind of margin of mistakes, also depending on how all of this is being implemented. It could be up to plus 3.4 degrees, for example, by the end of the century, which is, of course, absolutely catastrophic. Yeah, so we are quite in a poor situation on this front. When we look at the energy transition itself, so which is one part of the decarbonization and one part of the results that we are seeing here, I would like to show this graph, which shows the evolution in terms of the total final energy consumption by source over 10 years between 2012 and 2022. So this is, bear in mind, this is final energy consumption. It's not only electricity, it's all the energy being consumed, right? And as you can see, in 10 years, despite the enormous amount of investment in renewable energies, especially wind and solar all over the world, as you can see, the use of fossil fuels into the total only reduced by 2 percentage points, okay, from 81% to 79%. And actually, in real values, in absolute terms, fossil fuels consumption increased and significantly. What is the reason? Well, just because we have been consuming much more energy. And if we consume much more energy, we cannot decarbonize it fast enough because it's too difficult to, at the same time, continue to increase the amount of energy we consume and to reduce at the same moment all this the use of fossil fuels. So thanks to renewables, we accelerate, well, we increase the fossil fuel consumption not as fast as without the renewables, but we still increase it. And these figures, I mean, 81%, it was like this for years and years and years, this around 81% of fossil fuels. Before, on top of this, we have what is the others, which usually is just wood, charcoal being burnt, in many cases inside homes, which also creates issues with the fumes in terms of local indoor pollution in these kind of elements. So this is the only category that really reduced, I would say, and this is good. But for the other ones, it's really way too much for the fossil fuels, right? As you can see, we still have a lot of work to do, but as long as we continue to increase energy consumption, it's going to be extremely difficult to decarbonize and to reduce the use of fossil fuels. In addition to these environmental issues, of course, we're also facing issues of inequalities, which make basically much more difficult to solve all these problems, which is directly related to carbon footprint, for example, with this 2023 Oxfam report showing that the richest 1% emit as much planet heating, so well, CO2 and methane pollution as 2/3 of the humanity. Yeah, of course, this also high concentration of wealth is a danger for democracy. It has been shown that over the past year, couple of decades, a significant share of the economic growth that is managed to be obtained every year is being captured by the top 1%, which brings them then an exorbitant pool of politics, social media, elections, you name it. Related to that, the explosion of fake news, which basically makes that people start not, well, they don't believe anything basically because everything can be fake news, and it will be increasingly AI driven and mass produced, of course. Well, and the rise of far right, and on these two aspects, I would say that the US is a case in point, but this is not much better in Europe. And all of this is undermining science and the possibility to reach consensus on accelerating environmental destruction. It causes the acceleration of environmental destruction and so on. So here's the situation where we are. Now, moving a bit to the law before I'm then moving then after to the different theories. So in simple words, okay, the law is a system of rules which are enforced by institutions. At the same time, it translates existing social conventions and it brings new ones. So it's not that clear cut. It's a continuum, right? So rules that people agree on are put into the law so that they become binding, so that everyone then has to respect these rules, and we are supposedly then able to live in peace all together because we abide by the same rules. And then the law also has the task of bringing new rules when the society is changing, sometimes when not everyone absolutely agrees with it, but then this is about rolling out these new obligations for all. It's also for technologies, rolling out new regimes to allow the deployment of new technologies, for example, because you can have the best technologies. If it's not authorized by the law, then it's difficult to really have it scale up, right, to the level where it really makes an impact. In practice, though, the law is an accumulation of past decisions, right? I mean, the law of today is the accumulation of all the laws of the past, which are being updated, some of them, to an extent, depends when and how and so on, but so it has a strong past dependency. And this, of course, the law is adopted by lawmakers and then it is interpreted by judges. So here as well, you have a strong, how can I say, we cannot separate the law from the politics because the ones that are adopting the law are politics. So it's not possible to really separate both, I would say, groups of people and both aspects. As I was mentioning, it has effects in the field of technology, in resource use, etc. It allows to scale up new technologies or to scale up as well new behaviors that are expected from the citizens through bindingness, which is its primary, I would say, aspect in terms of this scale up, or incentives. Now, what does it send us to? Well, actually, the law is strongly tied to capitalism. In this case, you can have a look at the work of Katarina Pistor from 2019, which is quite interesting. It's easy to understand, including for non-lawyers. She shows that the law has excessively been used to protect and support capital, too often without minding the social and environmental consequences, against the promise of additional economic growth. However, she argues that then the onus of the proof of this potential additional economic growth and how it will be spread should be provided by the people who argue for modifying the law to benefit their own interest against these kind of programs, of promises, right? So she said that capital is coded in law through legal modules, which are basically contracts, property rights, collateral, trust, copyright, and bankruptcy law especially. And then the attorneys have been using these legal modules and adapted them to enhance their clients' wealth, right? And states have supported the coding of capital by offering their coercive law powers to enforce the legal rights that have been bestowed on capital. So here's about the relation between capital, the law, and the state, right? The thing is that capitalism relies on never-ending economic growth. Because if you want to bring profit to shareholders every year, more profits, you need to have economic growth to generate more wealth each time. And this is an issue. I will come to this a bit later. Then in the law, so we have seen these developments by Katarina Pistor, but actually the law explicitly supports perpetual economic growth. Here is one example of the EU law, which in this case from the Treaty on the European Union, which is kind of the constitution of the Europe. It's not like this, but it's almost, I would say. So the founding treaties, it's very difficult to modify them. It's really the basic texts in the EU, and with Article 3.3, which mentions that the Union shall establish an internal market. Here also you see the priority of the Union is that it is a market. And that it shall work for the sustainable development of Europe based on balanced economic growth and price stability. So economic growth is mentioned, although it is mentioned as balanced, and there are some other aspects. So here as well, in the law, you always have these competing interests, and this is where the role of the judge comes in to interpret this. This is also one aspect on which I will come back later in the presentation, in the sense that we have possibilities within the legal system, although it is based on the quest for economic growth. There are some possibilities depending on how how the text is formulated, depending on whether you can have amendments to it, and depending as well what the judiciary decides in terms of interpretation, to find other ways. Okay, so these were some words for the legal part. Now, about the challenge of integrating these non-legal radical theories into the law with this example. So I like to ironically use this quote from Milton Friedman, where he says, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable, right? Actually, I put this in my funding application, the one that was granted last year on degrowth, right at the top to start with, to say, okay, well, basically, these are things that today, such as degrowth, are just almost a swear word. At least in Europe, the far right starts to use it to whatever is an environmental policy is about degrowth for them, which is, of course, absolutely stupid. But this is what they argue, because for them, this is something that supposedly frightens people. So this is politically impossible today. But the thing is that at some point, at least maybe that's what I'm kind of betting on, that the environmental and social situation is going to be so bad that, well, it will be one of the options that will be seriously on the table, or at least so I hope, and the earlier the better. So when we are talking about integrating radical theories into the law, one of the first things would be to say, okay, yeah, well, just let's do, you know what, tabula rasa. I mean, let's take a clean sheet and we start everything off again because the system is so corrupt and it's impossible and so on. The problem is that it's not really a short-term option. I mean, maybe it happens tomorrow that there is a global revolution, but it's unlikely. So we have to work on the basis of what we have today, right? We have to work at least as a starting point within the existing system and to propose amendments to be ready for a more, I'm put here, revolutionary situation, but that's this moment of crisis where options actually open, which were before unthinkable, and to avoid as well this work of working on radical theories and how to put them into the law or how to translate them in legal language and having them ready here also avoids remaining just paralyzed by the scale of the issues. By all we have to do, knowing that all this system is geared against this kind of radical theories, but at least we must do something, no? And to prepare for what for action now and in the future as well. So starting with energy justice. So energy justice, I will not spend too much time about the concept itself because I assume that you know about that because I know you already had some sessions about energy justice. So I'm just not putting too much into that, but it is a concept in academic literature since the early 2010s. It has boomed since then. There are some different ways to conceptualize it, such as with the 3 pillars or the 10 principles. But now I will zoom in a bit more on the growing stream of EG, energy justice, and legal issues, because there is also some developments about that started a bit later, maybe some 5-6 years after the main ones, who started more 2020, 2010, 2013, like this. For example, here we have this article from Heffron and Tallis in 2016, where they said that energy justice has not yet entered the legal or political debate. And then just a couple of years later, actually energy mention is mentioned by Heffron and some other colleagues as one of 7 principles of energy law that they propose as being part of energy law. What should be the principles of energy law as a branch of the legal system, right? As a part of the legal system on its own. And they propose one of them being energy justice. As well, energy justice should be the main trigger of energy law in the 21st century for some authors. And it's even, according to McHarg, initiated an ethical turn in energy law and policy. So at least from the side of academics, it starts really entering into the law and influencing the law. Yet it has not explicitly taken off in EU legislation, right? I would like to mention here as well that at the same time that we have seen this different conceptualization of energy justice, there is a broadening in the energy justice literature to now encompass not only the classic distributive recognition, procedural aspects, but also to take into account, for example, feminist approaches or non-Western, non-anthropocentric philosophies, such as the Buen Vivir from Latin America, or Rights of Nature, Ubuntu from Southern Africa. I put here a few publications, the two first ones from Sovakul arguing for this broadening toward other types of worldviews, and then the 2 last ones written with a colleague, with Paula Villavicencio Calzadilla, about, well, we're trying to add these new layers of, I would say, layers or local theories into energy justice, especially for the context of Latin America. So with this once more non-anthropocentric aspects, if you want to have a talk with her, she will certainly be happy. That being said, I've said before that the energy justice concept wasn't integrated much into the law, and I would like to compare this with a very close concept, which is the just transition, which is kind of based on it. It's really a neighboring one, but this one got actually more appeal to enter into Euro. So I will show you how then it worked in this case. So just transition, this is a concept which is initially coming from the unions, actually in the US and Canada in the 80s. And the basic idea is that workers shouldn't bear the burden of the of a transition, right? Especially towards reinforced environmental protection rules. For example, it was the case that some chemicals were banned in the US, and then it shouldn't be translated as layoff for the workers because it's not their fault. They're not the ones making these decisions. But then the concept was broadened in the 2010s. For example, we can have a look at the 2015 International Labour Organization guidelines for just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all. These are 7 guiding principles for the transition, stating that it must be participatory, rights-based, gender inclusive, holistic, focused on improvement of job quality, adapted locally, and mindful of international cooperation. So as you can see, it's not only anymore about the workers themselves. It's about the workers and all the world around them and all other aspects such as gender inclusiveness and so on. This concept, but then in this case more based on the workforce, was integrated into the 2015 Paris Agreement, so a legally binding agreement at international level. And as well in 2020, the EU Commission created the Just Transition Mechanism, which is mostly dedicated to the upskilling and reskilling of the workforce in carbon-intensive regions, especially coal regions. And this notion of just transition, then through the just transition mechanism, fund, sorry, in this case, was transposed in the law in 2021. So in this case, this is the real integration into the law for the concept of just transition. But I will come to that. Just here is a small graph showing what the just transition mechanism is. It's about basically putting a big bag of money on the table, first from the EU funds, but then to be topped up by the states and by private actors to reach up to 100 billions, and actually even more if you take towards 2030 in loans and in grants, etc., especially dedicated to, as I've said, these regions. So for example, in Poland and Germany, which really rely on coal, to avoid them to be completely deindustrialized and impoverished by the move towards renewables. So we are seeing this move towards integration to the law, but with what ambition? Here's the question. We can see here that actually the just transition concept has been broadly and often vaguely defined. And when we look really at the legal translation, the just transition is always referred to in terms that really lack prescriptiveness, right? Then I try to make sense of the different possibilities to have just transition put into the law with this graph a few years ago. And the most basic one that is usually used, which is the one at the bottom, is the just transition of the workforce. So this is the most reduced interpretation, and this is the one that kind of finds a way to make its way into the law. But then you have concentric circles, right, where you can also integrate the integration of social issues from public participation simply to really bottom-up decision making, and the final main objective of the just transition in this case, which then really resonates with energy justice, is fixing the injustice in the energy system through this transition. But clearly here, this is not what you really see into the law as being implemented. Okay, moving to energy sufficiency. Yeah. So to provide first a definition. So we have a definition which is actually from the IPCC 2022 report about sufficiency policies, which are defined as a set of measures and daily practices that avoid demand for energy, materials, land, and water, while delivering human well-being for all within planetary boundaries. So it requires, and this is the essential part, a change in habits. It's not, or not only, about technical improvement. And this is the main difference with energy efficiency. As you can see with this definition, this is broader than only for energy because it covers energy, materials, land, and water, because all of these are completely intertwined. But of course, when you talk about energy sufficiency, then you focus on these sufficiency aspects for the energy sector, which themselves embed some water impacts, water consumption, for example, for the energy system, which are actually quite significant. Now, it's important to know that without sufficiency for the have, fulfilling the needs of the have-not will worsen actually the environmental situation. So this is why it is needed to have this sufficiency, so this absolute reduction in consumption of stuff in the developed world, so to say, or the global north, because otherwise the simple fact to try to have the global south population, the poor in this world, having their needs being fulfilled will actually worsen the environmental situation, which is already, as I've seen at the start, in a pretty poor situation. Yet this energy sufficiency idea or theory has potential for major impacts over the whole world and economy if it is really ambitiously applied. Here are some examples. So it is necessary for appropriate decarbonization and on time, as it has been shown, for example, by a 23 study for transportation, where it is shown that only electrifying and lightweighting the transportation does not suffice to remain under the plus 1.5 degrees by the end of the century, where we need a major modal shift towards active travel and public transportation. So this is a study in this case for the Greater London area, and it shows the different scenarios with the different types of actions that could be undertaken. On top, you have the baseline, so the situation of in terms of cumulative emissions up to 2050. And then the more you go downwards, the more you see different options and what is the impact in terms of these cumulative emissions towards 2050. So moving to battery EVs powered by 100% renewable energy actually lowers the bar only slightly, because you also have to take into account, for example, well, not only the tailpipe, which is the black line, but also the EV embedded emissions, which is from the building, the construction of this, was manufacturing, sorry, of these cars, and a few of other aspects, retrofitting, lightweighting, and so on. The only ones that really have a strong impact are the car travel activity, CTA, when you reduce it by 40, 60, 80%. So the fact that you take your car 80% less of the time, or rather there are 80% less cars on the roads and so on, then you really manage to arrive at a level which is compatible with the 1.5 degree pathway. So this is really important to see the different impacts of these different types of activities. Here's another study on which shows the same kind of results, but in this case more related to the mining impacts and not that much on the emissions, although it also plays a role. So if we decrease car dependency, we right size EV batteries, and we create a robust recycling system, then it may allow to reduce lithium demand in the USA by up to 92% in 2050. The policies to implement this are more public transportation, less and smaller cars, and recycling, but the most effective step is the sufficiency one. This is the fact of having less cars and smaller cars on the road. Once more, doesn't matter if it's only EVs or fossil fuels, etc. We need to have less cars and smaller cars, and clearly we should dump all the SUVs to the garbage, because this is the worst that we can have, even electric ones. And this is the problem, is that this is, well, 50% of the sales worldwide for a few years already, and well, it has disastrous impacts in terms of both mining and emissions and so on. Yes. So the fact that if we really implement sufficiency to the extent that is necessary, it will have sizable economic impacts. Okay, so this is where we will actually tie it to degrowth in a couple of slides as well. But I wanted to say some words before that about the integration of energy sufficiency into the law. So it has proven difficult to integrate energy sufficiency into the law, not only Europe, but also at the level of the member states. Here I would like to refer to a recent study by some colleagues on the integration of energy sufficiency in French law. So in France, we had a strong push for, or at least so-called sufficiency policies from 2022 onwards, well, especially in 2022 and 2023, because of the war in Ukraine and gas prices, which increased a lot and which caused the electricity prices as well to increase a lot and so on. So it became really important to have a sufficiency policy. So many measures were adopted, but the researchers found that energy sufficiency measures are very general, unspecific. They are spread out in the legal landscape, so in more than 20 acts, and they're often temporary test measures. We say, okay, we implement this for 1 and 2 years and maybe only on one part of the territory, and then we will see if it works or not, and so on. And they are very often non-binding as well. Here you have the reference. It's going to be published in English as well soon. So this is a bit of an issue, but there are some potential openings related to energy sufficiency. Here, for some context, EU law, I've said, well, the law I've said is based on economic growth. For the pursuit of economic growth in EU, when you look at policy documents, discourses by the top staff of EU Commission, these kind of things, EU law is now increasingly based on the idea of green growth. Right. The theory of green growth, which is based itself on decoupling, and the idea of this is to secure economic growth while reducing environmental pressures sufficiently fast. So this is the main paradigm that is in the law. I will come back to this a bit after. And at the same time, then, or opposite to this, energy sufficiency doesn't appear in EU law. Right? This is two different theories and two different. They entail two different ways at organizing the transition and reorganizing society. And the one that is so far being preferred by EU lawmakers is the one on green growth and decoupling, but not the one on energy sufficiency. But some instruments, existing ones, may serve a sufficiency orientation at the condition of doing some amendment. Yet, for example, if we take the Energy Efficiency Directive, which was adopted in 2012 and which was then revised in 2018 and in 2023, we have into this directive an instrument which is very interesting, which is a cap on total primary and final energy consumption, which at each round of updating of the energy efficiency directive is lowered, right? So this is a hard cap on total energy consumption. The tool in itself is sufficiency compatible. So we have a legal tool that is existing, which can serve towards a sufficiency policy. The only thing we have to do is to put more ambitious targets. But this is to show that we have legal tools that exist. This is not completely a crazy theory of reinventing everything once more. It's not about reinventing the law and so on. We have legal tools that exist, which are working well, which are here in the law for 15 years. And the only thing we need to do is to toughen them. Right. So this is the first example. Another one is that in 2018, the energy efficiency first principle was included into the energy efficiency directive, and it was only just included like this without being really made operative. And in 2023, with the reform, it was done. In this case, energy efficiency should be considered as the first option in planning and investment decisions when setting new rules for the supply side and other policy areas, especially for investment above 100 million euros. So this is a nice way to spread the priority towards energy efficiency, so energy efficient investment, towards energy efficient equipment, the best that you can have in the market, in all the aspects of public decision making. So it's potentially very powerful, and in this case, it would require an amendment, but this could be supplemented with or placed under an energy sufficiency first principle. The idea would be, okay, first, before any investment, before building a road, before extending an airport, or whatever other aspect, before building new buildings or refurbishing the aircon of this building, you must first think, okay, do I need it, with a sufficiency perspective? And then if I need it, yes, let's have the one that is the most energy efficient to limit the impact. Moving to degrowth, which is the last theory I will deal with. As I've said before, well, basically degrowth is just the consequence, or let's say a degrowth policy would be the consequence, for example, of an ambitious energy sufficiency policy. Energy sufficiency is part of it, it's not completely different. Energy sufficiency is just kind of a set of tools which are part of this degrowth, which is a bit broader. So how to define degrowth? You can use here a definition from 15 years ago, but which is still largely used. You have some different ones, but the main building blocks are part of it anyway. So it's a democratically planned reduction of energy and resource use designed to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being. So I underlined the different, I would say, building blocks of this definition. So firstly is democratically planned. So it's not about being imposed from the top. Reduction of energy and resource use. This is the hardcore part, I would say, of it, and also where it relates to energy sufficiency. It's about reducing energy and resource use. Why? Why to bring the economy back into balance? So to reduce to an extent the economy, hence the strong economic aspects and the one that frightens everyone, into balance with the living world, so the environmental aspects, but also in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being, so the more human/social aspects. Degrowth is, in the end, a consequence. It's a consequence of the disastrous environmental situation in which we are, which requires strong actions in order to tackle this disastrous environmental situation. And these strong actions will have massive economic impact. And if you don't prepare for it, you have a recession. And recession is, of course, unemployment, poverty, blah, blah, blah. And there, degrowth comes to say, we are going towards the wall. We need to take radical decisions. This will have an impact. Let's get organized for this. For example, let's decide which kind of production and consumption will reduce. Let's reduce SUVs production. Let's reduce flying because we cannot decarbonize the plane tomorrow, at least the ones that are 100 seats plus, no? So let's select what we must absolutely reduce, and let's decide how we organize for everyone to have conditions of life in dignity. So this is a growing theoretical framework which is used in academic legal publications, but usually more in conceptual terms or international law, human rights law. I've put here a few examples, but there are actually more. It's really the legal aspects within the application within the articles. Sorry, is growing quite strongly since the early 2020s. So there are some developments about that. Now, actually, it became a scientifically much more solid pathway to return within planetary boundaries than the green growth I was mentioning before and decoupling. Here's a graph where you can see actually, so what is decoupling and where it should be. This is the line that goes down towards the green part. This is sufficient absolute decoupling. This is when we manage to indeed secure economic growth while at the same time reducing sufficiently the environmental impacts, because you see the blue one going down while you see the large one in dots with the GDP that goes up. This is what is supposed to happen with the decoupling. The problem is that we are not there. Okay, no countries in the world is at this level of sufficient absolute decoupling. Some of them are into insufficient absolute decoupling, which is the second one from the bottom, the green one, where, okay, there is decoupling, so we have some level of economic growth while we are actually decreasing impact, talking about only CO2 here, because if we could talk about material footprint, actually no country is reducing it, so this is also another issue at the same time. It's not only about CO2, but we are reducing it maybe by 2% while we have to reduce it by 7% per year. So it's not enough. And then we have relative decoupling, which is where you have GDP growing and environmental footprint still, but not as fast as the GDP. And then you have coupling and even recoupling. In some cases, you have some decoupling for some years, and then you have a recoupling. So it depends also on the years, and you have to look at it over the long term. So the problem is that, of course, decoupling fails. Here are the finding of an article from 1.5 years ago, showing that the emissions reductions that high-income countries achieved through absolute decoupling fall far short of Paris-compliant rates. At the achieved rates, these countries would on average take more than 220 years to reduce their emissions by 95%, emitting 27 times their remaining 1.5 fair shares in the process. And to meet their 1.5 fair shares alongside continued economic growth, decoupling rates would on average need to increase by a factor of 10 by 2025. So once more, we are far from it. Sometimes you see declarations that, yeah, we have managed it and so on. The problem is that often it's, well, not enough. And the second problem is that the figures that are usually used by governments arguing for this. We see this from, for example, Denmark, but also last year in France as well, is that they only use the national production and consumption, but not the total footprint, meaning that they don't include the imports. And for countries in Western Europe, half of the footprint actually comes from the imports, mainly from China, but also other countries. So you have to take into account export imports in order to ensure that indeed your system, your people are consuming to the level they should limit their consumption or not. And this is definitely not the case. Yes, one of the reasons why decoupling fails, well, the first reason is that there are not enough measures that are being adopted, not radical enough for this. But another one is the rebound effect. The rebound effect materializes when a resource use becomes more efficient, its cost per unit goes down, fostering an increase in this resource use. So efficiency brings growth, which enables the savings from efficiency. And this is something almost universal. And this is something that eats a lot into the gains in energy efficiency that you will have. So this is a problem. It is actually generalized in society. You have a study from 3 years ago that shows that through empirical evidence that energy efficiency improvements in various European countries have reached close to 100% rebound effect at economy-wide scale after 2 years. So all the energy efficiency gains were basically lost after 2 years in these countries. Usually energy efficient, the rebound effect, the easiest way to think about that, to say, okay, I will invest to better insulate my house. So I have, I will double the size of my walls, and I will insulate the roof, etc. And therefore, I will save energy. This is true. This is true. The problem is that then you are likely to heat up more your house in the end because you then gain more comfort, right? So you are consuming more energy than what you were doing before in relative terms, meaning that if before you were consuming 100, with this installation, you should then reduce it to 50, but you say, then actually I'm not paying a lot of energy, so I will still consume 70, to give an idea. So the gains are not that large because you are changing your behavior as well. So this is the most direct rebound effect, but you also have this thing about economy-wide um, energy rebound effects. For example, you do all your insulation at your place. You have to pay every year less for your energy. Therefore, you use this money to actually take the plane and go to Bali now every 2 years. You have a rebound effect at the economy level. And it's, well, a large example in terms of, yes, well, exaggerated almost example of you are going to Bali, but just the fact that you are using this money to consume more goods that are imported will also have an impact. Um, this is why if you only rely on energy efficiency based on implementing new technologies which are more efficient without at the same time doing education information about the fact that you still need to reduce the consumption of these things that are now cheaper, you end up with these kind of rebound effects. And including in circular economy. So circular economy is, in principle, we have this economy which is as a line because we extract, we transform, we use, and we just dump. Then the idea is to have a circle because then we reuse the waste and so on. But even within the circular economy, there are rebound effects which often are not taken into account. For example, if we want to recycle more, we need to build more recycling infrastructures. We need to have more trucks on the roads to gather all these goods and then recycle them and so on. I'm not saying it will be the same, but I'm saying that when you are expecting to win 50, you only win 20 in terms of the savings, for example, if you don't take this into account from the start. That being said, so degrowth really directly challenges the economic system okay? And it's legal embeddedness, what I was talking about at the start with economic growth being embedded into the law, and therefore it faces resistance, which is quite expected. Yet, some legal instruments are already can be considered as degrowth compatible, or they have the potential to. Here, I can mention the sufficiency ones I've mentioned before, because I've said sufficiency completely is part of degrowth, or can be part of degrowth without trouble. But also, for example, renewable energy targets, to increase them as well. We do need that. This is also one important point. Degrowth is not about reducing the economic activity of all the sectors. Some of them we still have to grow, renewables typically, but some of them will have to go down much quicker, and especially fossil fuels related ones. As well, the deployment of energy communities may offer a possibility for a type of factor which would be more akin to engage in degrowth compatible activities. So this is about where people actually have more control over the energy system and the energy provision locally. But all depends as well on these amendments and strengthening. But it means that we don't have once more to necessarily invent a whole legal framework from scratch in this case, right? This is a radical theory. It doesn't come from the legal theories, degrowth, just like for energy sufficiency and energy justice. Yet there are existing instruments into the law which may, at the condition of these amendments and so on, be helpful into that. And actually, there are plenty of policy proposals. A couple of years ago, some authors identified more than 530 policy proposals that are related to degrowth in the academic literature. Now, the question is, how do you translate this into law? And this is where comes this the project that was mentioned at the start. We still have to find really detailed legal pathways on how to integrate the degrowth theory into the law. Okay, so that's a question I will try to break my mind for the coming 4.5 years with this project. So degrowth through energy law. The idea is to use the legal framework for electricity batteries in Europe to achieve a degrowth-focused energy law. And the question is really how? How do we do that? How do we do that? How do we integrate degrowth into the law? In this case, with the case of energy law and the batteries. The hypothesis, which is what I was basically explaining now in various occasions, that it's possible to find already adopted degrowth compatible provisions, which through amendments or new judicial interpretations may allow to actually change the law and to have an impact in real life, I would say. What do you want to translate in the law then? Well, for example, the principles. What are considered as the principles of degrowth, in this case, at least by Yorgos Kallis and colleagues, sharing, simplicity, conviviality, care, and the commons. How to proceed? In this case, well, I'm proposing to identify some legal principles or some legal constructs which are either facilitators or barriers for degrowth in different legal fields and in different countries. So via a comparative study of basically 4 European member states and at the EU level to see what favors and what blocks in this case, so to see what should be expanded and to see what should be amended or reduced. The final aim being to elaborate a method to integrate degrowth in the law, which would not be limited to only batteries and EU law. And by the way, why batteries? Because it's a key set of technologies for the decarbonization. Of course, we need to have batteries and much more batteries to mitigate the viability of renewables, especially PV and wind, but they rely on raw materials extraction. And well, yeah, there is research about that, about diminishing it. You can replace some of these metals. Well, this is the work of many of my colleagues at my center, but yet we are not there yet, and we still rely a lot, for example, on lithium and so on. Conclusion. So, as I've said at the start, capitalism and its never-ending economic growth target is embedded in the law. It is mandatory to find a way for radical theories into the law in order to have this scale up of these more desirable technologies and actions and behaviors and so on. It has been quite difficult so far for energy justice, energy sufficiency, and degrowth, yet there are means to make progress into the right direction. because we have some tools, we have some things that exist already. Now, will it be sufficient? That's really the tricky question. I would say that, well, within the existing system, it's unlikely to be enough. Okay, once more radical changes are needed, so radical change of the system itself is needed, as shown by this recent article in the Lancet Planetary Health again. But even though maybe it will not be enough, we must lay the ground for future changes, for further changes which may be incremental within the existing system or more radical depending on the context and its evolution. Remember the quote by Milton Friedman in this case. Yes, and that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And then I guess we'll have some time for questions.
Wow, thank you so much. Let's go a little virtual round of applause here. Uh, yeah, wow, that was so much information and
Yeah.
it thoughtfully displayed. So thank you very much. Um, yeah, we have a few questions that maybe we'll start with, and for the audience, feel free to drop your questions in the chat or raise your hand, and then we can call on you. Roman, do you mind maybe we can take off the share screen and then we can all
Yes, of
see?
course.
Um, but yeah, I think as a first question, we were curious what the balance is really between law and policy, or incentive structures, and especially kind of in the US context where we're kind of much more inclined towards the carrot than the stick. How do we kind of balance these things, and how do you incentivize things that are lowering consumption, that are associated with a higher standard of living through more incentivized structures?
Yes, I think there are kind of two components within this. You have to think about policies and law and incentives versus bindingness, mandatory aspects. Well, policy and law are, it's a continuum. Okay, policies per se, they don't have this legal force of the legal system, but usually with policies, you state what you want to do, and then you transfer a part of this in the law to make it then binding. But it's true that both are often conflated, right? And then this thing about incentives and versus, I would say, mandatory obligations, etc. Here as well, actually, in the law, you can just put obligations, even with criminal law and so on. But you can also enshrine into the law tax credits, incentives. No, so then this is just the module, as I was saying, Katarina Pistor, no, where you put the law. So this is kind of a recipient. Now about finding the blend, the balance between incentives and obligations. This is really a question that is which differs with each country, with each context, with each technology, and so on. I would say, well, you need both. To know to what extent you need more one or the other is very difficult to say. Probably you would need to base these kind of decisions on modeling to kind of have some guidance of what would be the impact of this or that. Of course, it also corresponds to an extent of a vision of the world and how it would work. I do think that some more level of prohibition is needed uh, of some detrimental aspects. I mean, I'm always thinking about these private jets, for example. I mean, honestly, taxing it, even if you increase taxes by 300%, the people that are using private jets are just wealthy enough to continue using private jets. So what do you do when it doesn't work, this aspect of money? But indeed, for many aspects, you cannot just, or at least for things that the majority of the people in the country rely on, you cannot just outright ban things. You might, in any case, provide ways for people to adapt and to continue to do what they have to do to make a living. Otherwise, it will not work. Otherwise, this is the yellow jackets in France, where you just increase the carbon tax on oil without providing any possibilities for people to get rid of their fossil fuel run gas, their fossil fuel based cars.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I'm curious what those models might look like. But yeah, Nikunj, go ahead.
Hi, Rama. Thanks for your presentation. It was great. This is a topic that I was recently introduced to last summer in Denmark by a researcher, Anna Deeg, who was also working on degrowth. So I have been following it for a bit. I really like the concept, and it really gets to the heart of what we need as a paradigm shift in society to get to a place where we're within the planetary boundaries. I wanted your perspective on this is a bit general, but how you feel degrowth fits in for the global south or the developing world who are on a track to be increasing consumption very fast. And the messaging, if with degrowth, just as a word, can sometimes be a bit harsh to say, oh, you should not be increasing consumption coming from researchers in the global north who are at a much higher rate of consumption to begin with. But at the same time, it is something that if there's an intervention at this stage and we can get that decoupling of growth from emissions that we want, then that could make the biggest difference going forward. So I wanted your perspective on how you feel it can be applied or it can be messaged, and what are your hopes or realistic views on how this will turn out? Thank you.
Thank you very much to you. It's a very valid question. This is one that is very important, and it took a bit more time to be really developed into the literature, but this is now into some articles as well. It's being integrated really into the thinking of the degrowth scholars. Basically, degrowth is for the rich, so to say, at the international level, right? So this is for global north countries because we are completely outside of the limits, both in our daily lives, but also and even more in terms of historically accumulated emissions and consumption and so on. For global south countries, it depends which countries, but for the global south countries, mostly the idea is not to apply degrowth, but to implement a different model of economic growth, which is not the ones that we followed in the global north. So this is in this case already moving towards a post-growth economy, right? So for global north, we are supposed to go down with the degrowth and then move towards what is considered kind of a steady state economy, which is called also a post-growth economy. And for the global south countries, once more, it depends which one. It depends. It's different if you talk about Mali versus China, right? But for some, at least, global south countries, they still have some a legitimate right to emit pollutants, which would be the necessary consequence of their developments in order to manage to secure once more a level of life for the population which is well, with dignity, no? So they can still increase before reaching this steady state level of their economy. So this is why indeed we're not trying to force feed degrowth and reduction of consumption in countries where already people just cannot make it. So this is really important to separate them. Now, once more, within the global south, there are lots of different situations. The ones of China is very different from the ones of some African countries, just to take some examples. So in each country, there should be then a different pathway in terms of how much they could still be allowed, so to say, although there is no world government. So allowed is really a word that is maybe not the most appropriate, but I think you see the idea to emit and to consume in terms of raw materials to secure, yeah, I mean, uh, to gain a secure access to food, social security, these kind of things. So these are really two different aspects. In terms of whether I'm confident or positive about that, yeah, I'm definitely not confident that we are going to be able to implement all of this on time, etc. But we have to try. I mean, what else? Here's the thing. We need to try to find solutions. That's what I was arguing a bit at the end. No, finally, with this project and with many other aspects, we provide some small steps because this is what we can try to push for now, with the hope of being able to push for much more. But we are not the ones taking the decision.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have kind of a related question, which has to do with the legacies and ongoing extractivism that comes out of Europe and also just generally the global north. And so I'm kind of curious how degrowth interacts with extractivism, not only as it exists in the global south, but then also we see this kind of drive towards onshoring happening both in the US and in Europe, where you then will still go to the kind of least economically and politically powerful communities and then extract from there. So yeah, kind of curious how degrowth operates with that, understanding that it's not, it still is kind of needing some level of renewables and some level of kind of materials that require extraction.
Yes, it's a tricky question as well, and one that is not resolved. Well, mostly because basically degrowth comes from, I mean, this is an activist movement at the same time that it is an academic theory. So you have both at the same time, which are not always following the same pathway. It's kind of parallel, but not fully, and so on. So it becomes really difficult when all of this touches the ground and when you have to make decisions on what do you authorize and what not. But this is why, I mean, we need to talk about that and we need to take decisions and we need to make ways to find ways to make decisions supposedly that are the most fair that we have to that we can have. So indeed, for example, in the EU, even in the Euro, since last year or the year before, we have this Critical Raw Materials Act, which says that we should onshore indeed a significant part of the critical raw materials extraction, processing, and then recycling. I think for mining is like 15% should be within the EU, and for many metals we are way under this. Most comes from China, or either is mined somewhere and then refined in China and then reaches Europe. And we should also not be reliant for any of these materials by at over 60% for any given materials. So this is well, typically looking at China in this case, but this is going to be difficult. And I think, I don't remember if it's by 2030, 2040. Yes. So we need to exploit locally the resources we will still need, even within a degrowth pathway, in order to get rid of fossil fuels and therefore to have much more renewables as quick as possible. So I would say the good part maybe of this is that in a degrowth pathway versus in a green growth pathway, instead of having to install, I'm saying just whatever figure, 15,000 wind turbines in one given country, then maybe you only have to install 8,000. So it's, I mean, I'm extremely pro renewables and wind turbines. I told you at the start, I worked actually for a wind turbine, wind farm company, and I'm pro renewables and so on. We need them, and we need much more of them, of these renewables. But yet, one less wind turbine is that less amount of materials that we have to put in. So that's good. We need it, but we need as many as we need, but as little as possible, right? So this is the first point on this. And we cannot afford to just say, no, we do not want to extract it in Europe because then it will come from other countries. Of course, I mean, lithium currently comes from basically 5 countries, China, Australia, Chile, Argentina. Well, 4 countries then, a bit more, it's a bit more in the US as well, in some other countries and so on, but the 4 main ones were these ones. So it will come from these countries, it will come also from Bolivia, which has supposedly large resources, but there are huge questions about that. I've mentioned one of these articles we have been working on with energy justice and lithium extraction as well. So we have to exploit it locally. Now, where do we exploit it locally? Well, look, there is a huge lithium mine project right here, 1 kilometer away from where I live, right in Cáceres. There is huge opposition from the people. At the start, it should have been an open pit mine. Then, well, basically after so many protests, they say, okay, it will only be an underground mine. But there are still some issues about or doubts about the quality of water, so water pollution, or earthquakes risks, etc. So, eh, so this is for the, I would say, the local impacts and so on. But one of the things that also fuels that is that, yes, I mean, we live in one of the poorest regions in Spain. And Spain is not one of the poorest countries in Europe, but this is not Germany, this is not Denmark, this is not the Netherlands, etc. So it's the people here say, once again, we get to have all the crap dumped in our garden, no? And for what? For other people to buy SUVs in Madrid and in Berlin. So this is something that is extremely difficult. This is what's very difficult to have this process of onshoring, reshoring, having local exploitation of these resources. If you don't take into account these justice aspects of, once more, these are the same that have to have this extraction without getting the benefits from it. And this, of course, this is nothing new. It happened a lot, and it still happens within the energy transition. Once more, here, the issue of energy justice and just transition is absolutely key. Yes, the other major projects of lithium extraction, there is one in France, in the center of France, which is rather going okay because there was already a mine here. So kind of people are used to it and so on, so it's fine. But there are other projects which are completely rejected by people. And otherwise, for example, the EU has been backing a lot the government in Serbia, which is a neighboring country, because the country is quite rich in this kind of materials such as lithium and so on, and the local government, which is very authoritarian, wanted to exploit these materials for the benefit of Europe. So all of this is completely entangled. And once more, it's difficult to push for this transition without taking into account these aspects. So yeah, this is where I see once more degrowth as a solution in terms of consuming less, therefore reducing impact in aggregated terms. And what we do here at home, because we have to do it, then to try to do it in the fairest way possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Also, just to put a little plug briefly, in 2 weeks we'll have Thea Villafrancos, who helped write the report that you're mentioning about more mobility, less mining. And then the week after, uh, oh my God, now I'm forgetting his name. But Ramon from Opsal, who is also part of resisting lithium extraction in indigenous lands in mostly Chile, will also be here. So kind of related topics. So I would love to have everybody there. But first I'll go over to Carice.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your talk. My question is related to employment and labor, which you mentioned a little bit some of the impacts there, but wondering if you have more thoughts on how the potential negative impacts of energy degrowth on employment and economic activity within communities that are very reliant on that energy intensive industry can be mitigated.
Yes, these are indeed two levels of this question of employment. The first one, which is kind of whole society, and the other one that is really about most impacted sectors being regions or being industries. Because of course, fossil fuel industries, ciao, SUVs, goodbye, and I mean flights as well should reduce as well, no? So this is why when we come to these issues of policy proposals for degrowth, and in terms of labor force and work, etc., I would say there are two main ones. The first one is, I mean, this is classic. There is no magic into this. Reducing the working time because we have to divide the remaining work between the different people who have to work if they have to work indeed to make a living. So reducing working time one way or the other. And the second one, which I just forgot. Yes. Typically democracy at work. But this is then about not that much about how you split the work available and necessary. Also, just one, I'm adding this. If we are reconsidering what we need to produce and how, then indeed we will decide what we need to produce less of in which industry. This is where you will be able to pinpoint these different aspects. And then you will actually know before this happens in a recession type of situation, you will know before where you will need to put most efforts in terms of reskilling, upskilling, or this kind of thing. So it also has this aspects of trying to plan it a bit better and to realize this and to be sure that people have meaningful work in the sense that many people who are working in the fossil fuels industries are, okay, it's a good job, it's well paid, but they know that they are, well, part of the situation, which is a bit problematic in terms of the planet. And many of them will be happy to have another job in the clean industry, so to say, at the condition that they can actually have this where they are living and for a decent wage and these kind of things. So it's not, I'm not saying that these people are bad people. I'm talking about the industries themselves and a bit more about the ones who are taking the decisions. And then coming back to that, for the 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 sector which will remain, the sectors which will remain, which will be many sectors, then democracy at work, so that actually workers can decide or have more of a say over what they produce, how they produce it, in and by making this bet. So I would say that they will want to have once more this meaningful work, which will not endanger their lives and the ones of their communities and of the future generations.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm just thinking about our president and yeah, the way in which we kind of talk about coal or used to talk about coal and kind of moving away from coal and how, yeah, all of these questions are really relevant. But yeah, we're running up on the end of time, so we're hoping to just end with a question about what is motivating you in your work and what advice you might share with students, scholars working on energy justice issues, particularly kind of in our context of living in the US, where it seems as though even just the basic concepts that you're laying out are difficult to talk about.
Yes, what motivates me in my work? Well, actually, for many years, because I came really to degrowth more like some 5 years ago, and I started to involve this more energy justice a few years or so before and so on. But I mean, in itself, the job is interesting because I find it extremely interesting to see this nexus between the law and the energy system. It's extremely diverse. When you work in energy law, you have to know about the technical aspects, the economic aspects, the social aspects of the energy system. And of course, the energy system is an all-encompassing system where, well, basically there is no society without energy, without modern energy. So all of this is extremely motivating. I think it's enriching, intellectually speaking. And then comes on this, I would say, the layer of yeah, well, trying to orientate this towards something that is indeed meaningful and going to the right direction. I mean, yeah, we are living through some difficult and depressing times, as you were saying, especially in the US now. But I mean, everything passes. And most importantly, many of these things are unfortunately not in our hands. So usually I'm trying not to get too annoyed at the things over which I don't have control. Um, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to get control over it, but at least as long as you don't have it, the attitude should not be, okay, I don't care because I don't have control, but okay, at the moment I cannot do anything about that. Let's try to do more, but like, okay, it's not my and alone my responsibility to me and only me and so on. Because otherwise, then, well, you just get completely in kind of doomer mode, and you don't want to continue to do anything at all, and you don't care, and it's quite negative, I think. So yeah, keeping hope and trying to do our best, and at least so that when you end your day, you are happy about yourself and what you try to do.
Wonderful. Yeah, a good note to end on as we all kind of maybe go back to class or our research or whatever we're doing. But yeah, thank you so much, Homa, for your presentation. This was really, really insightful, and I hope that we can even kind of continue some collaborations with some of the work happening at UC Davis and integrate some of these ideas. And yeah, thank you so much for everybody who came and stayed and asked questions. And we'll hopefully see you all next week again at 3 p.m. For our next talk. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much for the invite once again. It was a real pleasure. And yeah, good luck for the rest.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Bye bye.